Okay, so we're working on 8-5. In this entire chapter, we are graphing quadratics. We're graphing parabolas. In this lesson, we're going to review how to graph from previous lessons on the first page, but then we are going to learn a different way that is slightly less work than what we have been doing with creating the big table. So before we get to the graphing, I want to go over some of the things that you are going to have to do on your homework. That is, by solving an equation, we can figure out solutions to a quadratic. And so if you look up here, the x-intercepts when y is 0 of a quadratic function are the solutions to the related quadratic equation. What that means is your x-intercepts are your solutions. So wherever it crosses the x-axis. So in this first one, here we have our x-axis on all three of these, okay? And on this first graph, you'll notice that the parabola does not cross the x-axis. So it has no x-intercept. If it has no x-intercept, that means that there is no solution. Okay. Also, if x equals a negative number, yes, if x equals a negative number, there are no solutions. And we'll get to see what that looks like later in our notes. Okay. Here, we see that the parabola crosses the x-intercept at 3. So it only crosses the x-intercept once. So that means that there is one solution. Okay. This is also, you'll see on the next page when x equals 0. And you'll be using these notes to help you determine the number of solutions. The next one, we see that the parabola is crossing the x-axis at 2 and -2. So our solutions are 2 and -2, and you have 2 solutions. Another way to show this when we get to the next set of notes is when x is greater than 0. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. Let me make sure I did that right. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at these two. We have known that in order to find, in order to be able to graph a parabola, you need to know the vertex and then you need to get 2 additional points. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to rewrite our equation to y equals rather than 0 equals. So we're going to change this to y equals x squared minus 16. Does anyone remember how to find the vertex? Because we need to create a table and choose some values, but the first values we want are the vertex.
First you gotta put -b over 2a, but we don't have a b, so it would be 0. And then you gotta plug in the 0 into the equation.
Yes, exactly. So because our b is 0, that means, oops, times 1, that means that when x is, or that means that our x will be 0. So we have 0 squared minus 16. So y is going to equal -16. That means that our vertex is 0, 16. Now, you're going to notice on your graph that there is no 16. So we're going to create a 16 way down at the bottom. Okay, so we're just going to come all the way down here at the bottom and we're going to plot a 0, 16. So let me go over this a little bit again, just to make sure everybody gets it because I did go fast. Here you have x squared minus 16. You're missing the bx. So that means that your b is going to be 0. In your vertex formula here. So we have -1 times 0 over 2 times a, which is 1 over here. And -1 times 0 is 0. And anything 0 over anything equals 0. So our x is 0. So we plug that into our equation where x is, and we solve for y, and we get -16. This is how we get the vertex. Okay, so now let's move over to trying to find 2 additional points. How do we do that? Table. So I'm going to create my table here. And put my vertex in the middle. And then I choose 1 point below that and 1 point above that. So we're going to have -1 and 1. Okay. So when x is -1, we have -1 squared minus 16, which is 1 minus 16. -15. And then when you have 1 squared minus 16, so you get -15. Okay, so now we're going to graph this. So we have -1, 15. That's going to be about here. And 1, 15, which is going to be about here. Oh, yep. And then we just draw our parabola. Now, I would probably create some additional points, just because then my graph might look a little bit more accurate. So I am going to do that really quick. I'm going to choose, let's see. Let's choose -3 and 3. So -3 squared is 9. 9 minus 16 is -7. 3 squared is 9. 9 minus 16 is 7. So now we have points that are actually going to fall on our graph, and this might look a little bit better. So -3. Oops, that's a -7. -3, -7. 3, 7. Okay, now we can draw our graph. So there's not really much new with this because we've done this before. So I want you to go ahead and do example 2. And I'm going to pause the video. Okay, go ahead and check your graph, and then we're going to do one other thing before you move on. Okay. Actually, no, we're going to stop right there. Okay, any questions on this? Okay, let's go over here. And we are going to now solve these equations without graphing for the sole purpose of finding the solution. And remember, solutions are your x-intercepts. If you remember the activity we did on Thursday, there were sections where it said zeros, solutions, x-intercepts, and I told you they were all the same. Well, they are. So what we're actually doing is we're finding the x-intercepts, which we also call solutions to the quadratic. So you want to rearrange your equation up here to solve for x. So that's what we're going to do here. We want to isolate x. So look at this right here. What do you think we need to do first to isolate x?
Add 16.
Yes, we're going to add 16 to both sides. Okay. And we end up with x squared equals 16. What would we do now?
Square root.
Square root, yeah. Reagan did the little symbol. Okay, so we're going to square root. So we have x equals 4. Now, do you know another possible solution besides 4? -4. So remember, 4 squared is 16. -4 squared is 16. So your solutions are both positive and -4. Okay. Now, how many solutions? And that is what you're trying to figure out. It's 2. So what I want you to do is I want you to look up here. And it says, if your answer results in 0, there's one solution. If your answer results in a negative number, there is no solution. And if your answer results in a number other than negative or 0, you will have 2 solutions. So because this is not negative, this 16, and it is not 0, then we will have 2 solutions. Okay. All right, let's look at example 2. First, we're going to subtract 4 on both sides. And we end up with x squared equals negative 4. Now, at this stage of algebra, we are not going to square root negatives. So because our x squared results in a negative number, and our notes up here say a negative number is no solution, then we know that there is no solution. You can, but that's when you get into something called imaginary numbers, and you'll learn that in algebra 2. And good job. Okay, so this is as far as we're going to go with this one. Okay, now we're getting into some multiplication and division. What do we need to do to both sides? Yeah, so let's divide by 3. And we're left with x squared equals 0 over 3. So x squared equals 0. Now it does just so happen that we can square root 0, but it just equals 0. So our notes say at the top, if x equals 0, there's one solution. Okay. All right, let's go to example 4. Okay, we're going to add 27 to both sides. So this is just solving an equation. And now you're going to divide both sides by 3. And now you're going to square root them. And remember, in this case, x can be a positive or a negative 3, and that means there are 2 solutions. All right, what about this last one? You have 81 minus x squared. Hmm? Right. So in this case, you could rearrange it. Just put the x squared on the other side, you get a positive x squared. So now you have 81 equals x squared, and then you just square root it. So your answer would be plus or minus. What am I doing? That was weird. So it's plus or minus 9 equals x, and then there are 2 solutions. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to do all the practice problems on your own, and then we'll come back and we'll check them. I will just give you a heads up on practice number 5, you will end up with a fraction. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, try all the practice problems, and then you can unpause the video when you're ready to check your answers. Okay, we're going to go ahead and check. So I would like for you to check practices 1 through 3 first. Make sure you got that. Yes. So Leela asked a good question. Do you have to have the plus minus? Yes, you do, because then you're just saying that there's only one solution. meaning that it only crosses the x-axis once. So you need to show the plus or minus. So this is 1 through 3. Any questions about those?
No.
All right, here is 4 and 5. Okay, let's go on to page 3. Oh, that was the answer. Okay, now, example 6. It says, find the side length of a square with an area of 196 feet squared. So here we have a square. The area, well, you know, it's my square, 196 feet squared. And can somebody tell me what the formula is for the area of the square?
Oh, side times side.
Yeah, side times side. You could put s squared or you could put x squared. It doesn't matter. Okay. Now, we're going to take this formula and we're going to plug in what we know. We know that the area A is 196. What we're trying to figure out is the side. So once we plug it in, now we have a problem similar to what we were just doing, right? What do we have to do to both sides? Square root. So from that little booklet we did of all the square roots, do you guys remember?
We didn't do that.
You guys didn't do this. Okay, does anyone know what the square root of 196 is?
102.
It's 14.
I don't think so.
So each side is 14 feet.
I don't wanna find the ring.
So okay, so now let's go down. I'm gonna skip 7 and I'm gonna go straight to 8, but I'll go back up to 7 in just a minute because this one deals with another square. So this time we're gonna find the value of x right here and the square. And then it tells us to round to the nearest 10th, which means that we are going to end up using our calculator on this one. So our formula is area equals s squared, and we're going to plug in what we know. The area is 34, and each side is 2x, and then we have to square that. So let us do this. So we have 34 and 2x squared is 4x squared. Okay, now at this point, I could either divide both sides by 4 or I could square root. Now I'm going to square root because I see that 4x squared is a perfect square. So to me, it would be easier to do it that way. So I'm going to square root both of them. So I know that 4x squared is 2x. Now I need to figure out if I can simplify 34. Now this is going back to chapter 5, where we took the square root of 34 and we found found factors, or the prime factors. We did a factor tree. So it's 2 times 17, and 17 is prime, 2 is prime. So really, we cannot simplify the square root of 35 any further. So, 34. So we have the square root of 34. Now at this point, we have to divide both sides by 2. So we have the square root of 34 over 2 equals x. But notice that the instructions tell us to round it to the nearest 10th. So using my calculator, and I want you guys to try to do this on whatever calculator that you're working on. I'm going to find the square root of 34 and then press equals. Okay. Then you take that number and you divide it by 2. So divided by 2. And I get approximately 2.91, and it says round to the nearest 10th. So it's going to be 2.9. So each or X is approximately 2.9 inches. Okay. Now, what you can do if you don't have a calculator right now, you can come back to your notes and you can use a calculator to divide the square root of 34 by 2 and make sure that the way that you're doing it on your calculator is correct by matching it to the answer here. Okay. Any questions? All right, let's go to 9. Let's go to 9. All right, it says find the value of X for the triangle below. So I'm going to find the value of X. And it says round to the nearest 10th. Someone remind me of the formula for the area of a triangle.
Base times height divided by 2.
Yes. So I heard someone say half times base times height. That is also correct. I prefer to do the division by 2, but you could do it either way. All right, so now we're going to plug in what we know. The area is 96.
35.
95. Guess I should be wearing my glasses. And then our base is 3x. Our height is 3x. And then we divide by 2. So there's 2 ways we can go here. Does somebody want to suggest our first way? Yes. Okay. All right. So let's do that. Let's multiply base times height. So we have 95 equals 9x squared over 2. Before we square root though, what is something else that we can do? Yeah.
We can multiply 2 on both sides.
Yes. Let's multiply 2 on both sides. By doing that, cancel out the 2's and we're left with 190 equals 9x squared. Now we're going to square root it, okay? Now, one thing that I want you to understand when I was grading your homework is that just because you can use a calculator does not mean you don't have to show your steps. A lot of you missed a lot of points on the last homework assignment because while using a calculator, you didn't show your steps. So I need you guys to make sure that even though you're using a calculator on this, that you are going step by step. So I know that you know how to do it.
But we were allowed to use a calculator. Yeah.
Oh.
On some of your homeworks, I can't remember, maybe it was 8-2 I'm thinking of because of the model problems that we did. Okay, now 190. I am not going to simplify this because I don't need to, because we're going to use a calculator to do that. So I'm going to leave this as the square root of 190. But what is the square root of 9x squared?
3x.
3x. Now what we're going to do is we're going to divide both sides by 3. And when we take the square root of 190 and we divide it by 3, we get 4.59. So rounding it to the nearest 10th would be 4.6. So each x is approximately 4.6 meters. And do not forget your units. Yeah, I'm not really concerned about that. All right, we're going to go up to 7. But before we do, any questions? Okay, 7 is going to be a little bit tricky. And you do have one like this on your homework. So when we get to a certain point, I want you to think back to chapter 5. It was one of the last lessons you learned. But we haven't used it since, which we probably should have. Okay, find the radius of a circle with an area of 100 inches squared. So we have a circle. And we want to know the radius. And the area is 100 inches squared. Okay, this is what we know. It does not give us the formula though. Does anyone remember the formula for the area of a circle? Yes, pi r squared. Okay.
Or pi diameter. No.
No. No, not diameter. That's perimeter of a circle. Okay, so we're gonna plug in what we know. And we're gonna leave our answer in terms of pi, meaning we're not gonna turn pi into 3.14. So 100 equals pi r squared. So because it's asking for the radius, we have to isolate that r. And so we need to get rid of the pi and we need to get rid of the squared. So the 2. So what should we do first?
Get rid of the pie.
Get rid of the pi. Let's divide by pi on both sides. Okay. So we have 100 divided by pi equals r squared. Okay, now we have to square root. So we're going to square root our 100, our pi, and our r. So can we square root pi? I'm going to show you something.
Oh my gosh.
So what is the square root of 100? 10. We're going to leave pi as a square root, and that is going to give us r. Okay. Now, does anyone remember the rule about having a square root in the denominator?
You can't have square root in the denominator.
So what should we do?
I just know you can't have.
No.
I heard somebody say it. Multiply both the numerator and the denominator by pi. Good. So look at this. We're going to take 10 divided by the square root of pi times the square root of pi over the square root of pi. This is called rationalizing the denominator, because remember, your denominator cannot be an irrational number. And this is what the square root of pi is. It is an irrational number. So to get rid of that, we just multiply by itself, because the square root of pi times the square root of pi is the square root of pi squared.
But if you cross the pencil, it's still a pie underneath.
No, that's not what we're doing. Oh,
No.
it's the square root.
Oh.
Okay, so if you remember how to multiply fractions, which I hope you all do, you multiply straight across. 10 times the square root of pi is 10 square root of pi. Square root of pi times the square root of pi is the square root of pi squared. Oh. Okay, let's not complain, please. Let's learn. So then, so we know that the square root, or we should know that the square root of pi squared is just pi. Okay. So this does not ask us to round to the nearest 10. So we can leave it in terms of pi. So it's 10 square root of pi over pi inches. Okay. On your homework, it does say to round to the nearest 10th. So I'm going to show you how to do that though with this. Okay. So on your calculator, we are going to go a little bit backwards. I'm going to find the square root of pi. And my calculator happens to have a pi symbol on the top. So find, and then I press equals. Then I multiply by 10. Then I divide by pi. And I get approximately 5.64, which rounds to 5.6. So, which is approximately 5.6 inches. Okay. Now let me do something really quick. I'm going to see if we needed to rationalize the denominator or if we could have just plugged this in. So let's do right up here. Okay. 10 divided by the square root of pi, 5.6. So just so you know,
You don't necessarily have to rationalize the denominator when you use the calculator, but I did want to review it with you because it will be on the final. So that concludes our lesson for 8-5.